The morning was brisk, with a soft frost clinging to the quiet suburban streets as the yellow school bus hummed through its usual route. Sam Peters, the driver, gripped the large steering wheel, his hands rough from years of early mornings and long days. He was in his late 40s, with a kind but weathered face and a streak of gray framing his dark hair. This job was his lifeline, not just for the paycheck, but for the sense of purpose it gave him. He had grown to care for the kids he transported each day, their chatter and laughter often the brightest moments of his routine. Sam rounded a familiar corner, his eyes scanning the road ahead. The houses here were modest, their lawns bordered by frost-dusted hedges. He slowed the bus as he approached his next stop, habitually glancing at his side mirror. That was when he noticed something odd. A small figure was sprinting toward the bus, her backpack bouncing wildly with each step. Her coat flapped behind her like wings, and her arms waved frantically. Sam squinted, quickly recognizing the girl as Delilah Carter, one of the quieter students on his route. She was only 8 years old, a petite child with soft brown curls and timid eyes that rarely met anyone's gaze. But now her expression was far from timid. It was desperate. Alarm bells rang in Sam's head as he brought the bus to a halt, its engine rumbling softly. Delilah reached the side of the vehicle, banging on the door with her small fists. Her face was flushed, tears streaming freely down her cheeks, and her breath came in jagged gasps. Sam opened the door swiftly, his voice calm but edged with concern. "Delilah, what's going on?" he asked, stepping down to meet her at the curb. The little girl stumbled up the steps, clutching the straps of her oversized backpack as if it were her lifeline. Her tear-filled eyes darted nervously back toward the house she had come from. Her trembling hands struggled to push her words out. "Please," she stammered, her voice shaking. "Don't leave me. I need help." Sam's chest tightened. He had seen fear before, but this was something deeper, a raw terror that left him frozen for a moment. He crouched to her level, his voice steady but filled with worry. "Delilah, slow down. Take a deep breath. You're safe here," he assured her. "Can you tell me what's wrong?" Her wide, tear-filled eyes met his, and her lips quivered as she whispered, "I can't go back there. He said he'd hurt me if I told anyone." Sam's stomach sank. Her small frame quivered with fear, and as his eyes swept over her, he noticed something he hadn't seen before, bruises on her wrists, faint but unmistakable. He kept his voice gentle, masking the rising anger in his chest. "Who said that, Delilah? Who's trying to hurt you?" he asked, his weathered hands resting lightly on her trembling shoulders. Her lips pressed together, and she shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her face. "I can't," she whimpered. "He'll know I told." Sam took a deep breath, his heart breaking at the sight of her. He needed to act, and fast. Reassuring her, he said firmly, "You did the right thing coming to me. You're not alone in this. I promise no one will hurt you while you're with me." Delilah hesitated, then gave a small, hesitant nod. Sam guided her to the front seat, letting her settle there as he grabbed his phone. Leaving the bus in park, he called the school counselor, Miss Laura Hall, explaining the situation as quickly and calmly as he could. Miss Hall's tone grew serious immediately. "Delilah's been on my radar for a while," Miss Hall admitted. "She's been withdrawn, but nothing suggested this. I'll call Child Protective Services right away. In the meantime, don't let her out of your sight." "Understood," Sam replied, glancing back at Delilah. She sat huddled in the front seat, her knees drawn to her chest, staring out the window as though expecting someone to burst through at any moment. After completing the morning route, Sam parked the bus at the school and escorted Delilah inside, his protective presence never wavering. Miss Hall met them at the entrance, her expression somber but determined. Together, they coaxed Delilah into the counselor's office, but the little girl refused to let go of Sam's arm. "Please don't make me go back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Miss Hall knelt beside her, her tone soft but firm. "Delilah, you are so brave for speaking up. We're going to make sure you're safe, but we need your help to understand what's going on." Delilah shook her head, her small frame trembling. "I can't. He'll find me." Sam crouched beside her, his voice steady. "Delilah, you've already been so brave. You don't have to face this alone anymore." The sincerity in his voice seemed to reach her. After a moment of hesitation, she nodded faintly, but her grip on his sleeve remained firm. When the CPS caseworker arrived, the atmosphere in the office grew heavier. The woman, a calm and compassionate professional named Laura Jenkins, introduced herself gently. "Delilah, I'm here to help. I'll take you to a safe place where no one can hurt you." But Delilah cried out, her arms wrapping tightly around Sam. "No, don't make me go. I want to stay with Mr. Sam." Sam's throat tightened as he knelt beside her, his voice soothing but firm. "Delilah, I can't go with you, but I promise I'll make sure you're safe. I'll be here, and I'll check on you. You're not alone." Her tear-filled eyes searched his face for reassurance. After a long, agonizing moment, she finally let go, her small hand reluctantly taking the caseworker's. As they walked away, Delilah glanced back, her face filled with a mix of fear and fragile hope. Sam watched until they were out of sight, the weight of her trust pressing heavily on his heart. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. He wouldn't stop until Delilah was safe, no matter what it took. Shadows of truth. The morning sun barely peeked through the clouds when Sam Peters found himself standing outside the school counselor's office. The door was ajar, and the low hum of voices inside suggested that something was already in motion. He hesitated briefly, his hand on the doorknob, before stepping inside. Miss Laura Hall and Laura Jenkins, the CPS caseworker, were in deep discussion. A whiteboard on the wall was filled with scribbled notes, possible actions, and timelines. Sam's entry didn't go unnoticed. Both women turned to him, their expressions somber yet determined. "Sam," Miss Hall greeted, gesturing for him to take a seat. "We were just discussing Delilah's case." "How is she?" Sam asked immediately, his voice betraying the concern that had kept him awake the previous night. "She's safe," Jenkins assured him. "We placed her with a foster family, kind people with no ties to the area. She's still scared, but she's opening up slowly." Sam let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "And her father?" he asked, the weight of the question settling heavily in the room. Jenkins exchanged a glance with Miss Hall before replying. "We've flagged Todd Carter as a person of interest. His record isn't spotless. There are prior reports of domestic disturbances, but nothing concrete enough for an immediate arrest. He's smart, manipulative. If we're going to protect Delilah and get justice, we need more evidence." Sam nodded, his jaw tightening. "What can I do?" Miss Hall leaned forward, her glasses slipping slightly down her nose. "You've already done a lot, Sam. Delilah came to you because she felt safe. But there's one thing you should know. Her fear runs deeper than what we initially thought." Jenkins picked up the thread. "Last night, Delilah mentioned something chilling. She said her dad would find her if she ever told anyone. That kind of statement points to a level of control and intimidation that goes beyond simple fear. There may be more at play here." The weight of their words sank into Sam's chest. He had seen Delilah's terror firsthand, the bruises on her wrists, the haunted look in her eyes. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were just scratching the surface. "Do you think he might try something?" Sam asked. Jenkins folded her arms, her face grim. "It's possible. Men like Todd don't relinquish control easily, especially when they feel cornered." Miss Hall broke the tension by handing Sam a cup of coffee. "We're taking all precautions," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But Delilah's safety isn't the only concern. We need to uncover what Todd's hiding." Later that afternoon, Sam found himself driving through Delilah's neighborhood. He told himself it was to check for anything unusual, but deep down, he wanted to confront the man who had caused so much pain. As he turned onto her street, his eyes landed on the modest two-story house. The lawn was overgrown, and the curtains were drawn tightly shut. Just as Sam considered driving past, movement caught his eye. A man was standing in the driveway, shoving something into the trunk of his car. It was Todd Carter. His broad frame was hunched as he struggled with a heavy duffel bag, his movements jerky and frantic. Todd paused, glancing around as though expecting someone to be watching. His eyes flicked toward Sam's vehicle, and for a moment, their gazes locked. Sam's grip on the steering wheel tightened. His instincts screamed that something was off. Instead of driving away, he pulled over a few houses down and watched as Todd slammed the trunk shut and hurried back inside. Sam grabbed his phone and dialed Detective Mike Anders, an old family friend. Mike was the kind of cop who believed in justice, even when the system faltered. "Mike, it's Sam," he said, his voice urgent. "I need you to look into Todd Carter again. Something's not right." By the next morning, Anders had started digging. His investigation unearthed disturbing details about Todd's past, a sealed assault charge from his 20s, reports of loud arguments with his ex-wife Sarah, and an unsettling number of complaints from neighbors about strange noises at odd hours. But it wasn't just the past that concerned Anders. His gut told him that Delilah's mother, Sarah Carter, hadn't simply walked away from her family as Todd claimed. Her absence was a gaping hole in the story, one that no amount of Todd's smooth talking could fill. Anders called Sam. "We've got enough to push for a search warrant," he said, "but we'll need to move fast." That evening, a convoy of unmarked police cars pulled into Delilah Street. Anders, leading the charge, knocked sharply on Todd's door. The man answered with an air of forced politeness, his expression hardening as Anders presented the warrant. "This is ridiculous," Todd said, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. "I've done nothing wrong." "We'll see about that," Anders replied, stepping past him into the house. The search began methodically. Officers moved through the rooms, cataloging everything. The living room was immaculate, almost too pristine, as though designed to give the illusion of normalcy. But as they ventured deeper, cracks in Todd's facade began to show. In the basement, an officer found a loose panel in the wall. Behind it was a hidden compartment containing items that sent a chill through everyone in the room. Blood-stained rags, a child's broken bracelet, and crumpled sketches that could only have been drawn by Delilah. The images were haunting. Dark figures looming over a small child, her fear practically radiating from the page. Anders held up the evidence, his voice steady but cold. "Care to explain this, Mr. Carter?" Todd's face twisted into a sneer. "Those are just old things from when Sarah was still here. You're blowing this out of proportion." But his excuses didn't stop there. As more evidence surfaced, a locked closet containing Sarah's personal belongings, faint bloodstains on the basement floor. Todd grew increasingly agitated. "I want my lawyer," he finally snapped, his voice cracking under the pressure. Anders nodded, unfazed. "You're going to need one." Outside, Sam stood near his car, watching as Todd was escorted to a police vehicle. He felt a mixture of relief and unease. The man who had terrorized Delilah was finally being held accountable, but Sam knew this was only the beginning. Delilah's journey to safety and healing was far from over. As the police convoy pulled away, Sam glanced at the Carter house one last time. Its pristine facade, once a symbol of quiet suburban life, now felt like a hollow shell, an empty monument to the secrets it had tried to hide. He climbed into his bus, gripping the steering wheel tightly. For the first time in years, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Delilah had trusted him, and he wouldn't let her down. No matter what came next, Sam vowed to see this through. The dark truth unfolds. Sam Peters sat in the worn chair of his small living room, staring at the television without really watching it. The local news was broadcasting the day's biggest story: Todd Carter's arrest and the allegations of abuse and misconduct surrounding him. Footage showed Todd being led into the police station, his face a mask of defiance and simmering rage. The sight should have brought Sam some relief, But it didn't. His thoughts were still with Delilah. The phone on the coffee table buzzed, snapping Sam out of his trance. He picked it up and saw it was Detective Mike Anders. "Sam, you've got a minute." Mike's voice was steady, but carried an undertone of urgency. "Of course. What's going on?" Sam replied, leaning forward. "We found something, but it's not definitive." "Not yet," Mike said. "I thought you'd want to know, though. Sarah Carter's disappearance wasn't as clean as Todd made it seem. We're starting to piece together a timeline, and it's not looking good." Sam's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean?" "Her personal belongings were found in a locked closet. That's not normal for someone who supposedly walked out on her family. And then there's the blood we discovered in the basement. Lab results are still pending, but if it matches her DNA..." Mike trailed off, the implication heavy in the silence. Sam closed his eyes, his jaw clenched. "What about Delilah? Does she know anything about her mom?" Mike hesitated. "That's where it gets complicated. She's mentioned her mom in passing, but hasn't given any details that we can act on. We're being careful not to push her too hard. It's going to take time." Time. It was the one thing Sam felt they didn't have. "Let me know if there's anything I can do," he said finally. "You've done more than enough already, Sam," Mike assured him. "But stay alert. Todd isn't the kind of man to let things go, even from behind bars." The foster home. Meanwhile, in a quiet house on the outskirts of town, Delilah sat at the kitchen table, her small hands wrapped around a warm cup of cocoa. Her foster mother, a kind woman named Claire, sat across from her, offering a reassuring smile. The room was cozy, the faint smell of cookies lingering in the air, but Delilah's posture was tense. Her eyes darted toward the window every few moments, as if expecting her father to appear at any second. "You're safe here, sweetheart," Claire said gently. "No one can hurt you now." Delilah didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the table. After a long silence, she whispered, "He always said no one would believe me, that I'd get in trouble if I told." Claire reached out, placing a comforting hand over Delilah's. "But you did tell, and that was so brave of you. You're not in trouble, and we're all here to help you." Delilah hesitated, her small fingers tightening around the cup. "I miss my mommy," she murmured. "But she's gone. Daddy said she left because of me." Claire's heart ached at the words. She knew better than to press too hard, but she also knew that Delilah needed to talk. "Do you remember when she left?" Claire asked softly. Delilah nodded, her curls bobbing slightly. "They were yelling. Mommy wanted to leave, but Daddy said she couldn't. He told me to go to my room, but I could still hear them." "What happened next?" Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. Delilah looked up, her wide eyes filled with tears. "The next morning, Mommy was gone. Daddy said she didn't love us anymore, but I don't think that's true." Claire squeezed her hand gently. "You're so brave for sharing that, Delilah. Thank you." The search for Sarah. Back at the precinct, Detective Anders was deep in thought as he reviewed the growing file on Todd Carter. The items recovered from the basement painted a disturbing picture. A child's drawings depicting dark figures and red smears, Sarah's personal effects hidden away, and the faint bloodstains that hinted at violence. But they needed more. "Have we checked Sarah's financial records?" Anders asked one of his colleagues. "Nothing recent," the officer replied. "No bank activity, no phone records, just silence after the day she disappeared." Anders frowned. "What about Todd's finances? Anything unusual?" The officer handed over a printout. "There's a large withdrawal around the same time Sarah went missing. Could be nothing, but it's worth looking into." Anders studied the document, his mind racing. Get a team to track down where that money went. If he paid someone to help him cover this up, I want to know who. Sam's encounter. Later that evening, Sam returned to his bus depot after completing his route. The air was cold, and the lot was dimly lit, the flickering streetlights casting long shadows. As he stepped out of the bus, A voice called out from the darkness. Sam Peters. Sam turned, his heart skipping a beat. Todd Carter stood by the chain-link fence, his broad frame partially obscured by shadows. His eyes burned with a dangerous intensity, and his lips curled into a sneer. "What are you doing here?" Sam demanded, his voice steady but his pulse quickening. Todd took a step closer, his movements deliberate. "You think you're a hero, don't you? Sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." "I'm protecting Delilah," Sam shot back. "Something you should have been doing all along." Todd's sneer turned into a snarl. "You don't know anything about my family. You're nothing but a bus driver. Don't forget that." Sam stood his ground, his fists clenched. "I know enough to see that little girl was terrified of you. That's all I need to know." Todd's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You keep pushing, and you'll regret it." Before Sam could respond, Todd turned and disappeared into the shadows. Sam stood there for a moment, his heart pounding. He knew Todd was trying to intimidate him, but he also knew that the man was growing desperate, and desperate men were unpredictable. A break in the case. The following day, Anders received a call that changed everything. The forensic lab had confirmed that the blood found in Todd's basement matched Sarah Carter's DNA. It was the evidence they needed to push the case forward. Anders called Sam immediately. "We've got him, Sam. The blood in the basement. It's Sarah's. We're issuing a warrant for first-degree murder." Sam felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was tempered by a lingering unease. "What about Delilah? Does she know?" "Not yet," Anders replied. "We're handling this carefully. But Sam, this isn't over. Todd's a flight risk. We're moving fast, but keep your eyes open. If he comes near you or Delilah, call me immediately." Sam hung up, his resolve stronger than ever. Todd Carter's reign of terror was coming to an end, but the battle wasn't finished. Delilah still needed him, and he wouldn't stop fighting until she was truly safe. The truth emerges. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the precinct's interrogation room. Todd Carter sat at the metal table, his expression alternating between defiance and unease. Across from him, Detective Mike Anders spread a series of photographs on the table. The bloodstains from the basement, Sarah Carter's personal effects, and the drawings Delilah had made in her silent cries for help. "Mr. Carter," Anders began, his voice cold and steady, "these aren't just random items. They paint a very clear picture, one that you've been trying to hide." Todd leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "I've told you before, Sarah left. She couldn't handle the pressure. And as for the blood, we had an accident down there a long time ago. It's nothing." Anders leaned forward, his sharp gaze cutting through Todd's excuses. "Accidents don't explain hiding Sarah's belongings in a locked closet, or the fact that you withdrew a significant amount of money around the time of her disappearance." Todd scoffed, but there was a flicker of panic in his eyes. "You've got nothing solid. This is all circumstantial." Anders smirked, his confidence unshaken. "You're right. Alone, it's not enough. But combined with forensic evidence, a sealed assault record, and testimony from people who've seen your behavior firsthand, it's more than enough to put you away." Todd's face twisted in anger, but he didn't respond. The walls were closing in, and he knew it. Delilah's voice. Meanwhile, in the quiet safety of her foster home, Delilah sat with Laura Jenkins, the CPS caseworker. A gentle fire crackled in the background, and the room was warm and inviting. Laura had spent weeks building trust with Delilah, patiently coaxing her to share more about her experiences. Today felt different. Delilah seemed calmer, though her small hands still fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. Laura handed her a notebook and a set of crayons. "Sometimes it's easier to draw than to talk," Laura said softly. "You can draw anything you want. There's no right or wrong." Delilah hesitated, then picked up a crayon and began to draw. Her strokes were slow at first, uncertain, but as the minutes passed, a picture began to emerge. It showed a small house with a figure standing outside. a man with a dark shadow looming over him. Laura watched silently, her heart breaking at the child's depiction. After a moment, Delilah stopped drawing and looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "He said Mommy was gone because of me," Delilah whispered. "But that night, I heard him yelling. He was so mad. I think he hurt her." Laura took a deep breath, keeping her voice steady. "You're so brave for telling me this, Delilah. Thank you." A new lead. As Laura relayed Delilah's words to Detective Anders, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Anders had been combing through old police records and discovered a name that had been overlooked. Emily Mitchell, a former nanny who had worked for the Carters years ago. Anders wasted no time tracking her down. Emily lived in a modest apartment in a neighboring town, her life quiet and unassuming. When Anders knocked on her door, she answered cautiously, her eyes filled with wariness. "Ms. Mitchell," Anders began, holding up his badge. "I'm Detective Anders, investigating Todd Carter. I believe you used to work for his family." Emily hesitated, then opened the door slightly. "I don't want any trouble," she said quietly. "You're not in trouble," Anders assured her. "But we believe you might have information that could help us. It's about Delilah and her mother, Sarah." At the mention of their names, Emily's expression softened. She stepped aside, letting Anders in. They sat in her small living room, the walls bare except for a few family photos. "I left that job for a reason," Emily said, her voice trembling. "Todd, he wasn't the man people thought he was. He had a temper, especially after Sarah left." "What can you tell me about Sarah?" Anders asked gently. Emily looked away, her hands twisting in her lap. "She wanted to leave. She told me she was scared of Todd, but he wouldn't let her go. They fought all the time. The last argument I heard, it was bad. She screamed, 'You're going to kill me.' And then a few days later, she was gone." Anders leaned forward. "Did you tell anyone?" Emily nodded. "I tried. I told the police, but Todd convinced them it was just a marital spat. He's good at making people believe him." "Did you ever see him hurt Delilah?" Anders pressed. Emily hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. "Not physically, but emotionally. Yes, he'd yell at her, call her worthless. I tried to protect her as much as I could, but when I confronted him, he told me to stay out of it or I'd regret it." Anders thanked Emily for her time, leaving with a renewed sense of urgency. Her testimony, combined with Delilah's account, painted a harrowing picture of life in the Carter household. The breaking point. As the case against Todd built momentum, his behavior grew more erratic. From his holding cell, he made repeated phone calls to his lawyer, demanding they fix this. Meanwhile, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that Todd wasn't done causing trouble. One evening, as Sam was locking up his bus after finishing his route, he noticed a figure lingering near the depot. It was Todd's lawyer, a slick man in a tailored suit. He approached Sam with a forced smile. "Mr. Peters," the lawyer began, his tone oily, "I'm here to offer you some advice. Drop your involvement in this case. It's not your fight." Sam crossed his arms, his expression hard. "It became my fight the moment that little girl ran to me for help." The lawyer's smile faltered. "You don't know the full story. Todd Carter is innocent, and this whole thing is a misunderstanding. Walk away before you get dragged into something you'll regret." Sam stepped closer, his voice low and firm. "If you think for a second I'm going to back down, you don't know me at all. Tell Todd he can send whoever he wants. I'm not afraid of him." The lawyer's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Sam standing in the cold. The encounter only strengthened Sam's resolve. Todd was desperate, and desperate men made mistakes. Unraveling the mystery. The final breakthrough came when forensic analysts recovered evidence from an old junkyard. Anders had uncovered that Todd had sold his car shortly after Sarah's disappearance, claiming it was old and unreliable. But when the team located the vehicle, they found faint bloodstains in the trunk. DNA testing confirmed the worst. It was Sarah's. With this damning evidence, Anders prepared to file charges for first-degree murder. But he knew the case wasn't just about Sarah. It was about Delilah, the little girl who had suffered in silence for far too long. As Todd was escorted into the courtroom for his arraignment, Sam sat in the back, watching. Delilah's voice echoed in his mind, her quiet plea for help that morning on the bus. He knew this was just the beginning of her journey toward healing, but he also knew she wouldn't have to face it alone. Justice was finally within reach, and Sam was determined to see it through to the end. Justice on the horizon. The courtroom buzzed with muted whispers as Todd Carter was led inside, his wrists bound by cuffs and his expression a mix of anger and forced composure. His slick lawyer followed closely, his briefcase clutched tightly in one hand. Todd scanned the room, his eyes briefly landing on Sam Peters, who sat in the back row, his presence quiet but unyielding. Sam met Todd's gaze, his resolve etched into his features. He wasn't here to gloat. He was here for Delilah. Detective Mike Anders stood at the front of the room, his neatly organized files and evidence ready to present. Laura Jenkins, the CPS caseworker, sat beside him, her focus unwavering. They both knew this trial wasn't just about convicting Todd. It was about protecting Delilah and uncovering the truth about her mother, Sarah. Delilah speaks. At her foster home, Delilah was slowly adjusting to her new life. Claire, her foster mother, had gone above and beyond to create a safe environment for her. The walls of her bedroom were painted in soft pastel hues, and a small bookshelf held an array of children's stories. But despite the comfort, Delilah remained guarded. Trust, after all, wasn't something she could give easily anymore. One evening, Laura Jenkins visited the house. She brought along a small stuffed animal, a fox with bright eyes and a warm smile. "I thought you might like this," Laura said, handing it to Delilah. Delilah hesitated, then took the toy and hugged it tightly. "Thank you," she murmured. Laura smiled and sat down beside her. "I was wondering if we could talk a little. Only if you're ready." Delilah glanced at Claire, who gave her a reassuring nod. Slowly, she began to speak. "I heard Daddy say he was going to hurt Mommy," she said quietly. "I don't think she just left. I think he made her leave." Laura's heart ached at the weight of Delilah's words. "You're very brave for telling me this, Delilah. Everything you share helps us make sure you're safe and that your mommy gets justice." Delilah nodded, her small hands gripping the stuffed fox. "Can you make sure he never hurts me again?" "I promise," Laura said firmly. The trial begins. The trial opened with Anders presenting a timeline of Sarah's disappearance. He detailed the financial records, the hidden items found in Todd's home, and the forensic evidence linking Todd to Sarah's blood in the basement and the trunk of his car. The jury listened intently as Anders painted a picture of a man desperate to maintain control over his crumbling life. Todd's lawyer, however, was relentless in his defense. He argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that Sarah had left of her own accord. He even tried to discredit Delilah's testimony, claiming that her memories were unreliable due to her young age and emotional state. Sam sat in the gallery, his fists clenched as the defense twisted the narrative. He wanted to stand up and shout the truth, but he knew this wasn't his battle to fight. Instead, he leaned forward, silently willing the jury to see through the lies. A critical witness. The turning point came when Emily Mitchell, the former nanny, took the stand. She was nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she swore to tell the truth. But as she began to recount her time working for the Carters, her voice grew steadier. Sarah was scared of Todd, Emily said, her gaze fixed on the prosecutor. "She told me she wanted to leave, but he wouldn't let her. The last time I saw her, they were fighting. She screamed at him, telling him he was going to kill her." The courtroom fell silent as her words hung in the air. The defense attorney rose, his expression smug. "Miss Mitchell, you left the Carters' employment on bad terms, did you not?" Emily nodded. "Yes, because I couldn't stand to see what was happening in that house." The attorney smirked. "Isn't it possible that your testimony is motivated by a personal grudge?" Emily's voice didn't waver. "I'm here because Delilah deserves to be safe, and Sarah deserves justice. That's all." Delilah's letter. One of the most powerful moments came when Laura Jenkins submitted a letter Delilah had written. Too young and scared to testify in person, Delilah had poured her feelings onto paper. The prosecutor read it aloud. "My daddy always said I shouldn't tell anyone what happened, but I know it's not my fault. My mommy loved me, and I think she would still be here if he hadn't gotten so mad. I'm scared he'll come back for me, but I hope he doesn't. I just want to feel safe." The courtroom was silent, the weight of Delilah's words striking everyone. Sam felt tears prick at his eyes, his heart breaking for the little girl who had endured so much. The verdict. The trial stretched on for weeks, with the prosecution and defense battling over every piece of evidence. But as the jury deliberated, the truth felt undeniable. When they finally returned with a verdict, the courtroom was packed, every seat filled with people waiting to hear the outcome. The foreman stood, clearing his throat. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Todd Carter, guilty on all charges." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Todd's face twisted in rage as he was led out in cuffs, his shouts echoing in the hall. Sam watched him go, feeling a weight lift from his chest. Justice had been served, but he knew the real work was just beginning. A new beginning. In the weeks that followed, Delilah began to flourish in her foster home. With Todd out of the picture, she slowly let her walls down. Sam visited regularly, bringing small gifts and reading her stories. Each time, her smile grew a little brighter. One evening, as Sam prepared to leave, Delilah hugged him tightly. "Thank you for helping me," she said, her voice small but steady. Sam knelt down, his eyes meeting hers. "You're one of the bravest people I've ever met, Delilah. Never forget that." As he drove away, Sam felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Delilah's journey wasn't over, but she was no longer alone. And neither was he. Delilah's healing and the shadows left behind. The courtroom verdict was only the beginning of the journey toward healing for Delilah. With Todd Carter convicted, the legal chapter had closed, but the emotional scars he left behind would take much longer to mend. A safe place. Delilah's foster mother, Claire, worked tirelessly to create an environment where Delilah could begin to feel safe again. Every morning started with small rituals, picking out her clothes, helping Claire bake cookies, and reading stories together. These simple routines gave Delilah a sense of stability she had never known. One afternoon, Claire found Delilah sitting by the window, clutching the stuffed fox Laura had given her. The sunlight illuminated her small face, which looked pensive yet calm. "Are you okay, sweetie?" Claire asked, kneeling beside her. Delilah nodded. "I was just thinking. It feels quiet now. Not scary quiet, just quiet." Claire smiled softly. "That's because you're safe here. No one can hurt you anymore." Delilah looked up at her, her wide eyes searching for reassurance. "Even Daddy?" Claire's heart ached at the question, but she answered firmly. "Even Daddy. He can't hurt you anymore." Delilah seemed to consider this, then nodded, as if giving herself permission to believe it. "I think Mommy would like it here," she said quietly. Claire placed a gentle hand on Delilah's shoulder. "I think so too." Sam's role. Sam visited Delilah every week, bringing books and small gifts, things that might help her rebuild her sense of childhood. Each visit was a quiet affirmation that she wasn't alone, that someone cared deeply for her well-being. One evening, he arrived with a box of crayons and a new sketch pad. "I thought you might want to draw some more," he said, handing it to her. Delilah's eyes lit up as she took the sketch pad. "Thank you, Mr. Sam." Sam sat with her at the kitchen table while she drew. The first few pictures were simple: flowers, the stuffed fox, and a rainbow. But then she began to draw something else. A house with a bright blue sky above it and a small girl standing outside. In the corner, there was a faint figure of a woman, smiling down from the clouds. "Is that your mommy?" Sam asked gently. Delilah nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "She always liked when I drew pictures. She said I was good at it." "She'd be proud of you," Sam said softly. Delilah looked up at him, her smile growing. "Do you think she knows I miss her?" Sam's throat tightened, but he managed to answer. "I think she does, and I think she'd be really happy to see how brave you've been." The past resurfaces. While Delilah's life slowly began to rebuild, the shadows of her past weren't so easily banished. One evening, Claire received an anonymous letter in the mail. The handwriting was rough, the message chilling. "You think she's safe, but she'll never escape me." Claire immediately called Laura Jenkins, who contacted Detective Anders. Anders arrived within the hour, examining the letter with a grim expression. "It's likely from someone connected to Todd," Anders said. "We've already started investigating any associates who might be trying to intimidate you or Delilah." "Is she in danger?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. Anders shook his head. "We've increased patrols in the area, and you have my number if anything happens. We won't let anyone near her." Delilah, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. "Is Daddy coming back?" she asked, her voice small. Claire knelt down, pulling Delilah into a hug. "No, sweetheart. He can't hurt you anymore." Anders crouched beside them, his voice calm but firm. "You're safe, Delilah. We'll make sure of that." Sam's vigilance. The letter reignited Sam's protective instincts. He began driving by Claire's neighborhood every night after his bus route, keeping an eye out for anything suspicious. It wasn't just a sense of duty, it was personal now. Delilah had trusted him, and he wasn't going to let her down. One night, as he was parked a few houses away, he noticed a car idling near the corner. It was dark, and the driver's face wasn't visible, but the vehicle didn't belong to anyone in the neighborhood. Sam's gut told him something was off. He grabbed his phone and called Anders. "There's a car parked near Delilah's place," he said. "It doesn't look like it belongs here." "I'm on my way," Anders replied. Sam stayed on the line, keeping his eyes on the car. After a few tense minutes, it pulled away, disappearing into the night. When Anders arrived, he reassured Sam that the increased patrols would catch anyone trying to get too close. "You did the right thing calling me," Anders said. "We're not taking any chances." A community of support. Word of Delilah's story had spread quietly through the community. While most people respected her privacy, a few stepped forward to offer help. The local library organized a book drive to provide Delilah with stories and resources, and the neighborhood watch added extra patrols around Claire's home. One day, a small package arrived for Delilah. Inside was a handmade quilt, each square depicting something bright and cheerful. A sun, a field of flowers, a smiling child. Attached was a note that read, "For Delilah, because every child deserves warmth and love." Delilah clutched the quilt tightly, her eyes shining with emotion. "Why would someone make this for me?" she asked. "Because they care," Claire said. "And because you're worth it." A fragile piece. As the weeks turned into months, Delilah began to find her footing. She laughed more often, her drawings became brighter, and she started making friends at her new school. But there were still moments when the past crept back in, nightmares that woke her in a cold sweat, shadows that seemed too long, too dark. In those moments, Claire would sit with her, holding her close and whispering reassurances. "You're safe," she would say. "You're loved, and no one can take that away from you." Sam's reflection. For Sam, Delilah's journey was a reminder of why he had chosen to step in that day. He often thought back to the morning she had run toward his bus, her small frame trembling with fear, but her spirit unbroken. She had shown him what courage looked like, and in turn, she had reignited his own sense of purpose. One evening, as he sat in his small living room, he received a text from Claire. Delilah wants to say goodnight." A photo followed. Delilah, wrapped in the quilt, holding her stuffed fox, her smile as bright as the stars outside. Sam stared at the image for a long moment, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. He typed back a simple response. "Good night, kiddo. You're my hero. A brighter tomorrow." The seasons shifted, bringing warmer days and blooming flowers to the once frosted streets. Time had started to work its gentle magic on Delilah's life, slowly weaving threads of healing and hope into the fabric of her story. But as the world moved forward, the echoes of her past lingered, shaping the girl who was learning to embrace her new future. A day of courage. It was a bright spring morning when Claire walked into the living room to find Delilah sitting on the couch, her hands tightly gripping her stuffed fox. Something about her demeanor felt different, calm but resolute. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Claire asked, sitting beside her. Delilah hesitated, then turned to face Claire. "Can we go visit Mommy's grave?" she asked softly. Claire's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a question she had expected, but she knew how important it was. After Sarah's body had been found and laid to rest, the subject had always been approached delicately. Claire nodded gently. "Of course we can." Later that afternoon, Claire drove Delilah to the cemetery. Sam joined them, his presence a quiet reassurance for the little girl who had come to see him as her protector. Together, they walked through the peaceful grounds until they reached Sarah's headstone. Delilah stood in front of the grave, clutching her fox tightly. For a moment, she said nothing, her gaze fixed on the engraved letters spelling out her mother's name. Then, in a small but steady voice, she began to speak. "Hi, Mommy," she said. "I miss you a lot. I know you tried to keep me safe, and I'm sorry you couldn't stay. But I'm safe now, I promise. Claire takes really good care of me, and Mr. Sam visits all the time. I think you'd like them." Sam and Claire exchanged a glance, their eyes misty as they stood quietly behind her. Delilah placed a small drawing she had made on the grave, a picture of her and her mother holding hands under a bright sun. "I hope you're happy now," she whispered. "I'll keep being brave for you." Building new foundations. As the days turned into weeks, Delilah continued to blossom. She had started attending therapy, where she found a safe space to process her emotions. Art became her preferred way of expressing herself, and her drawings began to fill the walls of her room. One day, Laura Jenkins visited the foster home to check on Delilah's progress. She was greeted by the sight of the little girl enthusiastically working on a new piece of art at the kitchen table. "What are you drawing today?" Laura asked, crouching beside her. Delilah smiled and held up the paper. It showed a school bus parked in front of a house, with a girl and a man standing beside it, both smiling brightly. Above them, in bold letters, she had written, "Mr. Sam, my hero." Laura felt a lump form in her throat. "That's beautiful, Delilah. I think Mr. Sam will love it." Delilah nodded. "He makes me feel safe," she said simply. A quiet victory. Despite the progress, there were still moments of difficulty. Delilah's nightmares occasionally returned, and she would wake up crying, haunted by the shadows of her past. But each time, Claire was there, holding her close and reminding her that she was no longer alone. Sam, too, remained a constant presence in Delilah's life. He made it a point to visit every week, often bringing small surprises, books, art supplies, or her favorite treats. Each visit was a reminder that Delilah had people in her corner, people who would fight for her no matter what. One evening, as Sam prepared to leave, Delilah handed him the drawing she had made. "This is for you," she said shyly. Sam knelt down, taking the picture with a wide smile. "Thank you, kiddo. I'll hang it where I can see it every day." The community comes together. News of Todd Carter's conviction had spread through the community, and the outpouring of support for Delilah continued to grow. The local elementary school organized a charity art show, featuring Delilah's drawings as the centerpiece. When Claire told her about it, Delilah's eyes widened in surprise. "People want to see my drawings?" she asked. Of course they do, Claire said. Your art is amazing, and it tells your story. People want to celebrate how brave you are. On the day of the art show, the school gymnasium was filled with colorful displays. Delilah's drawings were prominently featured, each one accompanied by a small description she had written. Her favorite piece, a picture of her new foster family and Sam standing together, was placed in the center. As she walked through the exhibit, holding Claire's hand, Delilah couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in a long time, she felt proud of herself. The power of forging bonds. One evening, as Delilah and Sam sat on the porch, watching the sunset, she turned to him with a question that had been on her mind. "Why did you help me that day on the bus?" she asked. Sam paused, considering his answer. "Because you needed someone to stand up for you," he said simply. "And because you were brave enough to ask for help." Delilah tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "I didn't feel brave. I just felt scared." Sam smiled gently. "Sometimes being brave means doing something even when you're scared. And you did that. You saved yourself, Delilah." She leaned against his side, her small frame warm and full of life. "Thank you for not leaving me." Sam wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his voice soft. "I never will, kiddo. Never. A brighter tomorrow." Months later, Delilah's life had taken on a rhythm that felt almost normal. She had made friends at school, her laughter ringing through the hallways. Her artwork had become a source of inspiration for others, and she had even started dreaming of becoming an artist one day. Sam continued to play a vital role in her life, and their bond had grown into something unbreakable. He was no longer just the bus driver who had saved her. He was family. One evening, as Claire tucked Delilah into bed, the little girl looked up at her with a smile. "I think Mommy would be proud of me," she said. "She would," Claire replied, brushing a strand of hair from Delilah's face. "And so am I." As Delilah drifted off to sleep, her dreams were no longer filled with fear. Instead, they were filled with light, hope, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. And for the first time, she truly believed she was safe. A journey toward healing. As the days turned into months, Delilah's life began to bloom like a garden long deprived of sunlight. The little girl who once ran to Sam Peters, with tears streaming down her face, had transformed into someone who could smile freely and even laugh without fear. But while her progress was a testament to her resilience, the road ahead was still paved with moments of uncertainty. A milestone. One sunny afternoon, Claire found Delilah in the backyard, painting on a large canvas Sam had gifted her. The strokes of her brush were bold and confident, creating a vibrant picture of a house surrounded by flowers and trees. In the center of the painting stood a small girl with curly brown hair and a wide smile, holding hands with two adults, Claire and Sam. "That's beautiful, Delilah," Claire said as she approached, her voice filled with pride. Delilah beamed. "It's our home. The place where I feel safe." Claire felt a lump in her throat. "You've made it beautiful, just like you." Later that evening, Delilah presented the painting to Sam when he came to visit. "This is for you," she said shyly, handing him the canvas. Sam's eyes glistened as he took it. "Thank you, kiddo. I'll hang it in my living room, right where everyone can see it." A letter of closure. Though Delilah had made tremendous progress, there was one final piece of closure she needed. With the help of Laura Jenkins and her therapist, Delilah decided to write a letter to her father. It wasn't a letter to send. It was a way for her to express everything she had held inside for so long. The letter was short but powerful. "Dear Daddy, you hurt me and Mommy, and that wasn't okay. You made me feel scared, but I'm not scared of you anymore. I'm happy now, and I'm safe. I have people who love me and care for me. I hope one day you understand what you did was wrong. Goodbye." When Delilah finished writing, she handed the letter to Laura. "Can you keep it for me?" she asked. Laura nodded. "Of course. You've done something very brave today, Delilah. I'm so proud of you." Sam's promise. One evening, as Sam and Claire sat on the porch, watching Delilah play with a group of neighborhood children, Sam turned to Claire. "She's come so far," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "She has," Claire agreed. "But that's because she's had people like you in her corner." Sam shook his head. "She did all the hard work. I just gave her a little push when she needed it." Claire placed a hand on his arm. "You gave her more than that, Sam. You gave her hope when she thought there was none." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Delilah ran up to them, her cheeks flushed from playing. "Mr. Sam, will you stay for dinner?" she asked. Sam smiled warmly. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." A new chapter. Years later, Delilah stood in front of a crowd at her school's art exhibition. Now a teenager, she exuded a quiet confidence that had been hard-won. Her artwork, pieces inspired by her journey, was on display, each one telling a story of hope, resilience, and love. Sam, Claire, and Laura sat in the front row, their pride unmistakable. As Delilah stepped up to the microphone to thank everyone for their support, her eyes found Sam's. "To Mr. Sam," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "Thank you for being my hero. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You saved me, and because of you, I learned how to save myself." The room erupted in applause, but all Sam could do was nod, his heart full. He hadn't saved Delilah. She had saved herself. He had just been lucky enough to witness her journey, a brighter tomorrow. As the exhibition wound down, Delilah approached Sam, her face glowing with happiness. "Do you think Mommy would be proud of me?" she asked. Sam knelt down, looking her straight in the eyes. "I know she would be, just like I am." Delilah hugged him tightly, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Thank you, Mr. Sam, for everything." Sam held her close, his promise to her as strong as ever. "Always, kiddo. Always." As they walked out into the night, the stars above seemed to shine just a little brighter. Delilah's journey wasn't over, but she faced the future with courage, surrounded by love and hope. And for the first time, she truly believed that the best was yet to come.